Welcome to this special edition of the Sound Connections podcast. Today is Veterans Day in the United States, so first off, we'd like to thank everyone out there who has served. When we realized that this episode was going to come out on Veterans Day, we immediately reached out to several great former members of the armed forces we wanted to speak with. And it just so happens that Infocomm was right here in Orlando just a couple of weeks ago, and everyone was going to be coming into town anyway. So we packed up our gear, sat down to speak with two different veterans who now have a career in AV. We're bringing you both of their interviews in a single episode today. First up, we have Joe Antonacio. Joe served in the U.S. Air Force and got to work with a lot of great talent on various USO trips. Since then, he's worked with some top acts like Blue Man Group and Cirque du Soleil. Enjoy. Hi, Joe.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Glad you're here. And we've also got a co-host today, Michael Moore from Shure. Hi,
hello,
Michael.
hello.
So, Michael, when we were looking for a special guest for today, Michael, I reached out to you because I thought you were a veteran, but it turned out you just worked with the Air Force and not actually worked for the Air Force.
Yes,
I guess.
that is actually how Joe and I met. Was on actually two back-to-back USO tours over two different Thanksgiving holidays. And so when you reached out about this special episode, I thought, who is more better suited than Joe to come do this? So thought he was a great guy with a lot of experience in audio and a lot of passion for the industry as well.
Yeah. So how long did you guys work together?
Well, those tours are only like 2 weeks or so. You know, there's a little lead time on the front end of it. You know, what are you bringing? Where is it? And you have, Nitrix or EP4s and which consoles, all that jazz.
Stage plots.
Stage plots
wiring,
are optional.
all that, yes.
Look, I can use PowerPoint. Yeah. Because that was like 2001, 2002?
Yeah, that was actually, 03, I think, 03, 04.
Yeah, it was a minute ago. Yeah. But we've maintained a relationship all that time.
Yeah.
Just like somebody, once you tour with somebody, those relationships last.
Yeah, it was, I think there were about 14, 15 days on a trip. These trips were into Europe, and we did basically a show every other day. So you had a travel day and then a show day. So you ended up with a lot of time to hang out and get to know the crew, and then a lot of shows as well. And of course, every show was different in every location. It wasn't the same type of venue. So there were a lot of variables, and it was always a professional show that Joe and his team pulled off. So
even with you there,
really great experience.
Even with you there,
even with me there, they somehow figured out how to pull it off.
So Joe, I think we all have different stories of how we got into this business. Some of us on purpose, some of us by accident. So what drew you to the sound business, or AV, or?
Yeah, I've always been interested in the audio universe. I like to tell people the short version is, in 7th grade, I was running sound at the talent show, and during one of the rehearsals, I go to sit up in my chair, and my foot slips out from underneath me, and I kick the AV cart, and it's got one of those PV mixers in it, and of course the reverb in it goes splash, right? And what do I do during rehearsal? Like a good little boy, I run backstage to see what fell. Theater teachers like, no, relax, everything's cool. It's actually a spring reverb. Take a look. I've got one of these apart over here, and I was like, so the springs and metal and makes that sound just by bumping into the cart. He goes, yeah, so try not to do that. And I was like hooked ever since.
Oh, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And
that's definitely a unique story.
Yeah, that's what started it. And in high school, I was always doing the audio with the bands. I was always doing the audio with the theater productions, all of it. I don't know why. Yeah, it's 7th grade, a pivotal year for me in my life and my arc of things is because that was the same year they put the bass guitar in my lap and said, here, would you like to try one of these? And Rush had released Moving Pictures that year, so this manic, dual personality thing of musician sound guy was born. trying to sort out impedance and 2 amplifiers and two speakers and half the ohms. How does that work? All these things that you wrestle with when you're first introduced to them. Yeah, and that's where it started.
Nice. So you in high school you're doing you're running some sound and you picking up the bass, and so I'm imagining with your career in the military that it wasn't not long after high school that you enlisted.
Immediately, like see ya, gotta go, bye. And I actually initially enlisted as a bass guitar player in the Army. And I got there, and that's exactly what I did. I played bass guitar in the Army bands, which was a great experience. But I also had to wrestle with, because I was curious and wanted to be part of everything else you do, these SP1s and this CS800 things with these big capacitor, medicine bottle looking things that you'd stick into the back of the amplifiers, the crossovers. Mm-hmm. Trying to sort all of that out and learn, this is back in 80 something. Yeah, I'm class 86, so this would be 87, 88, 89. Yeah, and so these were the very earliest get your hands on things and turn knobs on things kind of experiences for me. But I was as a musician who knew how to do audio.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the Army.
Yeah.
So how'd you get from the Army to the Air Force?
Yeah, there's a story there. Berlin Wall comes down, and my options are stay where I was or go to Korea. And I was like, I don't feel like going to Korea, and I'm young and dumb and full of piss and vinegar. So I decided to separate from the Army and take my chances out in the world as a bass player, and I can always freelance as an audio guy because I knew audio. And my father gave me great advice. He says, keep one foot in the door. There's a National Guard band up the road, he tells me. Why don't you join the National Guard band? They do a weekend a month. And he's right. I explore it. And I come to find out one of the bass teachers I had was in that National Guard band. And dear, great, super duper human being and a killer musician. But he was from Philly and I was from Jersey. And he's like, oh, yeah. I call him up and he's like, this is the best thing ever. It's so casual. And besides, we could use your audio skills. All right, whatever. I could do that too. And that's what happens. I separate from the Army, and I'm in this National Guard band in the New Jersey Army National Guard band for a couple of 3 years. And it's great. It's all of those things that he promised. The rehearsals and gigs were a weekend a month, and then a 2-week tour every year. And then guess what happens? Reality sets in. I'm running out of money. I'm running out of patience. And I'm broke. And then baby number 2's on the way. So man, this is
that'll do it.
I'm gonna need to step up my game, So I do what I think reflexively a lot of people would do is try to get your old job back. And since the Berlin Wall had come down, the Army wasn't having anybody with prior service. It's like, we're done with all y'all. We're trying to go from bagillions of people to millions of people. And fortunately, God smiles on me or something because the Navy had changed the requirement. There used to be a requirement. It might be hard to wrap your head around this. Military bands weren't always what they are. They actually didn't always have bass guitar players. The Navy had always had tuba players double on bass, and bass players would have to double on tuba, which was kind of fun to watch. But
at the same
time, I needed a gig, a steady that was happening. So yeah, I ended up joining the Navy, of all things. So cool. I spent a couple of years in the Army National Guard band and buy a PA system and build it for them and show them how to use it and get things. And then time for me to go, and I go to Navy Band San Francisco. Why was I plucked to Navy Band San Francisco? Because they needed an audio guy out there too. Right, I did the audition. I kicked butt on the audition, and they asked me about myself and where I'd been, and the word, he knows sound too. So having both of the skill sets was really handy. So I go out in the Navy band and think, I'm a bass player. Played a lot of bass. Had a great time. This is in San Francisco on Treasure Island, which was fantastic because you got the best of both cities without having to live in either one of them.
Nice.
And that was really where the audio thing really started to grow long legs. I worked in a club out there with one of the trumpet players who had been doing audio for the Navy band in San Francisco. Needed someone to sub on his club gig. that he was doing audio for out in town, the Berkeley Square, right down the street on San Pablo Ave, right down the street from Meyer Sound. It was a 500-seat burnout club, but it was a club that everybody had gone through. So what a great place for a guy like me to start cutting my teeth on something outside the happy place of the military thing.
Yeah.
Because the military bands, they're relatively diverse. Most people assume marching bands. They assume wind ensembles, and those are good assumptions because that is a key part of what they do. But they also do rock and roll. They also do jazz and big band, especially big band, and pop rock, because fundamentally it's an outreach function.
Right.
It's some sort of public affairs element.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, so when you guys were doing this, what were these bands for? So was it to build morale for the troops? So would you travel around, or it sounded like on Treasure Island you were kind of stationed there?
Yeah, I was absolutely stationed right there in Treasure Island for about 3 years, till California kicked the military out of California. That was a big deal. I was like, gosh, who's going to watch the store?
Yeah, right.
Because there were like all these aircraft carriers in Alameda, and then there were none. But yeah, that band's mission at that time was relatively public affairs, where the high schools and the colleges would get the Navy band, or we would play down at Pier 39 and just do public outreach. And it's like, hey, everything's cool, we're cool. And now the mission of the Navy and the Army is different than the Air Force. They're similar, but they articulate them a little differently. But my time in the Navy was spent in San Francisco. That was where the Meyer thing took off, learning a lot of things at clubs in town. Actually, in Berkeley Square, in that venue, I did Korn when they had a van and they had a trailer. Third Eye Blind came through there when they were Fungo Mungo, which was a riot. There was a poster that had the Chili Peppers, Soundgarden, and Green Day on it. That went from when they had played that venue a few years prior.
Oh, right.
Everybody who was anybody. Leslie West played this gig. And it was redonkulous. The amount of high-named artists on their way up and on their way down would come through. And so I kind of got to meet some of these people. Sometimes they'd bring engineers. Sometimes they'd bring some staff. Sometimes there were just kids who were angry at their parents. And then you see a band like Korn, and you go, no, these guys are not just kids angry at these guys.
Yeah, they're talented.
Yeah, and they were playing a 500-seat club on the road in a van, eating McDonald's or starving from event to event to event to get by. No Doubt was another one. Who, I met coming through that way back then, back in the day, and they were great to work with.
So were you there? Started as Navy and then finished with Air Force?
Not quite. I had to do my time. So here's what happens. Joe goes to Hawaii. Joe's excited about Hawaii. Joe contacts the Meyer vendor in Hawaii, Randy Bowski, who is another super duper genius audio guy. But I'm stationed as a bass player in Navy Band San Francisco. Navy Band, I almost said Hickam. Oh my gosh, Pearl Harbor.
Hawaii.
Yeah, I'm getting older. Who's in the Navy Band building but the Air Force Band? Why? What's up with these blue dudes? What's going on with that? Well, it turns out the Air Force Band had just been reestablished by the Air Force Base, and if you don't know, the Navy and Air Force bases are literally right next to each other.
Oh,
okay.
So I mean, you walk 50 yards, you jump over a gas pipe, and you're on the Air Force Base. It was literally out the back door. So the Air Force had decided to reestablish a band. They did it on paper. They got the billets, they got the bodies, but they didn't have a building. So in a goodwill gesture, the Navy Band said, well, we can make room for you here. And while you guys get stood up until your building's finished, you can rehearse in our facilities. They lived and resided and were all parts of the Air Force, but their 9 to 5, their rehearsals and everything to do was in the Navy building. Who do I run into there? This guy named Doug, who was stationed in Sacramento with the Air Force Band. He's their sound guy. He's out here. He's one deep. He's the only Air Force sound guy in Hawaii. Poor guy. And all the other Air Force bands are going to send him their junk that they don't need anymore because they've upgraded. And he's going to hodgepodge things together to get that first year stood up. but he needs a hand. He needs somebody to hold up the back of the device while he screws the rack screws in.
Right.
And he talks me through his methodology of putting things together and why he labels his number system this way and his color system that way. And it was great. But after time goes on, I'm doing sound for the Navy band like I did all the time. And then Doug kind of calls me over and he asks me for help more and more often because I know the rig because I built it with him. And all of a sudden, not only did I build it with him, I know how and why he decided to make decisions he made. And Doug and I are freelancing for the same Meyer vendor out in town. So we see a lot of each other all of the time and always in this audio thing. So one thing leads to another and, hey man, the Air Force is looking for sound guys. Like, really? All right. I mean, that's kind of a long way around that. But, that's from 87 to this is now 99 is the end of my Navy career in Hawaii. I did an audition. They had a big festival where an officer comes down and he conducts the band, and I ran sound for the event. That was my audition. The officer signs off on it. Everybody thumbs up. And all I got to do now is separate completely. Be homeless, unemployed, disconnected, not part of the military, then walk into the Air Force recruiter's office. That was a little sketchy.
Right.
Since like 7 years earlier, I had joined the Navy because like kid number 2 was here.
Yeah.
It's like, crap, how am I going to pull this off? I did know a recruiter in Hawaii who was cool enough to bend the rules because as an active duty member of the Navy, they can't solicit me for the Air Force.
But you can't change if you.
There's
if
no
you're on your own.
switch.
There's no switch.
Right, sign
Once
here,
you sign
change
up.
clothes. No, you got to separate. You're done. You're out, and then you have to walk back in the next door.
Interesting. So
So
I
that
kind of
was-
just assumed when you mentioned all this, I kind of just assumed that they just let you switch branches. But no,
Not me. I don't know if anything's changed. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
Policies do change, but in my case, it was I
You were
was
there
without a net.
Yeah, until
But I did meet a recruiter who was like, look, if I was going to recruit you in your circumstance, these are the forms I'd have you do. And she was so cool because she walked me through all of the steps and everything was filled out right. And then eventually I separate and I leave Hawaii and I go back and hang out with my folks in Jersey for a couple of months, I burned through all my vacation time, or we called it terminal leave, all the leave days you get. And finally, the day comes, and I walk into the recruiter's office with a phone book-sized packet of stuff. And he's like, "You're the guy."
they were expecting you.
They were apparently the Pentagon, because there were like 1,500 cats in the Air Force bands. One chief and an assistant in the Pentagon to manage all of the people coming and going. So for the number of people enlisting in a given fiscal year, in a given quarter, of course that guy I'd been in touch with before I started this whole process, just trying to map everything out. And I walk into recruiters, he was amazed that, oh my God, the Pentagon called me to talk about you. What do you do? It's like, I don't know, bro, I'm a sound guy for the Air Force Band. Yeah, really, whatever.
Wait, you didn't give them the you don't know who I
You
am.
don't need to know who I am.
I'll
Right?
tell you, yeah.
So it was
If I
just,
told you, I'd have to kill you.
Yeah.
right? Oh, so that felt kind of special.
Nice.
It was a little silly. Yeah, but eventually what happens is in 99, I arrive in Georgia
Yeah.
at Band of the Air Force Reserve, Robbins Air Force Base, which the base is there, but the band is no more. That was the place that eventually turned me on to Mikey and their mission. The Air Force's use of the band is very focused, as it's part of the public affairs branch in the Air Force.
Okay.
The band falls under that. So when you have a public affairs issue, one of the tools you have, including commercials and putting stickers on race cars, and you can send the band.
So you were not part of the Air Force, Michael.
No.
But you ended up working together. So how did you guys? So who did you work for, and why were you working with the Air Force?
So I was much in the well. It almost sounded like even though you were enlisted, you were still doing a lot of freelance.
I was.
contracting
I
work.
freelanced throughout my entire career outside the gate.
Yeah. So I was freelancing doing AV integration, and then weekend warrior for a country act, Restless Heart. They had a lot of the big success was 80s, did world tours, things like that.
Okay.
Separated early 90s, came back together mid 90s, and one of the guys that was the tour manager, David Wilkerson, he was an Army brat himself, and had a lot of passion and drive. And I'm not exactly sure how he got hooked up. I know they had done a couple USO tours, I think, prior to me getting with them as well. I was in the capacity of monitor engineer and basically stage manager, kind of partial production manager, and just get a call one day, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, over Thanksgiving we're going to go over to Europe. You want to go with the USO trip?" And I'm like, "Sure, this sounds like fun. Do I have to pay anything?" No, everything's comped, and just hang out, get your per diem. So it was, still make a little bit of money, so still working, feeding the family.
But you'll get to go eat sheep's paws in Turkey.
Yes.
Sheep's paws.
By the way,
What
that's
is it
still
saying?
the best baklava I've ever
that-
had.
yeah, there
over
was some
there.
killer food.
in Cirque. It was amazing. And so it literally was one of these things like, okay, great. Well, need to fill out some paperwork. It is a government thing. You get issued a government civilian contractor's ID so that you're properly papered wherever you go. And it was a cool trip because were those C-141s?
Yeah, it was 141 and 130.
Yeah.
At that time. Yeah. It
So
was good times.
I had probably the closest person in my family was a great grandfather that served years and years back. And so I had not really been around military whatsoever. And so it was a totally different, really almost a life-changing thing to see how big, like, I don't think if you've never served or been around military, you don't really understand how big it is. And especially the first flight over there, we flew out of Atlanta, flew into Ramstein, and to see the world's largest population of U.S. citizens outside of the United States, it's its own city. Like you don't realize how big the military really, really is and what the presence is. And it's not the same as doing a standard commercial gig either. There are definitely a different workflow to some of it, but it was an amazing trip, and just the professionalism too. And I think that was one of the unique things that what you all had too, is that you worked very hard at building an absolute professional touring rig, and you're sitting in a cargo plane, and you've got the PA sitting in the back with 40 other people that you're flying over there.
And you're flying backwards, right? You're sitting backwards?
I don't know.
My dad was in the Air Force.
Yep.
My dad was in the Air Force, and I grew up in England, and we would, from time to time, fly to the U.S. to see his parents and my grandparents. But he's technically my stepdad. But he's been my dad since I was 3. I forget what they call it, like jumpers or something. I forget what they used to call these
The jump
flights.
seats.
Yeah.
Yeah, jump seats. So they would load these planes, the 141s or the 130s, with cargo from the UK, and then there might be 20 seats that they would let enlisted people and their families, come
Space
aboard.
A.
Yeah, and we would fly to Florida, but I think usually we had to go through an Air Force base in D.C. The name is
Bowling?
no, the
If it
other
wasn't
one,
Bowling.
Andrews.
Andrews.
I remember having to go through Andrews. But anyway, so yeah, I know what you're talking about because I've been on these bases in the UK. I've been a couple of bases in the US, Air Force bases. And I've also been to Ramstein, my wife being German. So
super cool.
Yeah. So I know a little bit about it.
What'd your
Being,
father do in
an
the
Air
Air
Force
Force?
brat until I was 15. From 3 to 15, I was a Air Force brat.
What'd your father do in the Air Force?
He was a mechanic. So
An aircraft mechanic, I guess?
Yep. And he worked on KC-135s. He used to be with SAC,
Strategic Air Command.
Yep. At the beginning of his career, first 3/4 of his career. And then for, I forget what reasons, but he actually switched to Mac, which he didn't want to do, but it just made more sense for our family or something where he needed to be stationed. And so he switched to Mac, which
Material Air Command.
Yes, which he really didn't enjoy. So, yeah, and when he went to that, he worked on the 141s.
Yeah.
So
Super
yeah.
cool.
Cool.
Right on.
So okay, so you guys threw out. I mean, earlier you threw out a few names, some interesting people that you might have worked with, Korn and no doubt, and then you mentioned baklava. So
Baklava is important. So yeah, that's the other thing about the military thing, right? This is all about the military thing. It's about Veterans Day, and about your dad and the kind of service, the kind of experience he brought to you in your world. And that's one of the greatest aspects of the whole deal is I've been all over half the darn planet, and I've met people from kingdoms and dictatorships and people who don't have a sense of humor and people who don't have hope in their eyes and people who do. And it really kind of levels out a lot of the biases and prejudices you might be born with or you might come up with from your culture. Because all of our cultures have our own favorites. Mm-hmm. And when you kind of travel a little bit, and what was it Tom Sawyer said about travel? It just, there's so many good people out there from so many good cultures, and there's so much wonderful stuff out there to see. Mm-hmm. And it's all very different, and it's all very cool. And there's room for them all, man. When I'm out there with the Air Force Band in Japan, which was the end of my career, the last 2 years were there. Watching those cats do their gig, which is just like my gig when I'm freelancing outside the gate, right? Except I'm the client now, and they're the vendor. And watching the attention to detail and how hard they work. And it's kind of cool to observe they're different than the guys in the States. Not necessarily better at some things, not at all, but just kind of learning from all of these sources is such a blessing. It's why if you can do a couple of years in the military, do a couple of years in the military.
Well, I was going to save that question for a little later, but we'll do it now. So, you've had this great experience, and I think we can all relate to that after listening to you. But so if you're a young person, I mean, do you recommend it? I mean, for
it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of guys, and maybe we'll talk after. You might know a couple of these guys. I've had a couple of guys who I worked with who just it was the wrong call for them.
Yeah. So they're part of the band for 4 years or more.
I did know one guy who insisted that they couldn't make him do something, and boy, that was the wrong thing to say.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, it was like, bro, it's like now you're taking it to the next level.
So you can't be afraid of structure and discipline, but if you're good with that,
you do need to buy in.
Yeah.
You do need to buy in and be part of it. Even if you determine for yourself it's not for you, you got to give them what you can, the best of your ability, or they're going to chew you up and spit you out.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, but the thing is, if you can do that, if you can look at it like, look, I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of something, I'm going to get a lot back.
Yeah.
The GI Bill and the medical benefits, but the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to meet people from all over the country. Yeah. In a New York minute, you'll be stuck with a bunch of people from everywhere else.
Yes.
Which is like really good for a young person.
Yes, definitely.
Definitely. And this is one of the things we love about our industry is that we're so diverse, so many people from so many places. And you can fast track that process in the military. And it'll never be time wasted. So that's why I encourage young people to really give it a good look. Maybe to consider it's probably the right term.
Depending on, I get it.
Because it ain't for everybody, bro. It ain't. But if they probably have something to offer if you're willing to do what it takes to get it.
Yeah. That's good advice.
I hope so.
Good advice. So let's fast forward a bit. So you've been out of the Air Force now for 10-ish? So what have you been doing
already?
What have you been doing with all that you've learned back there with, was his name Doug, building rigs?
Doug.
And the Meyer guys back there.
Meyer guys, yeah.
Berkeley. So now you've taken all that you've learned around the world from different people. And what are you doing?
Freelancing now. I came to now I'm freelancing. I'm on staff at the Orange County Convention Center's Chapin Theater. So freelancing with production companies in town, like Solitech, like LMG, and PRG, and you just getting the call, hey, I need a convention guy. What are you doing for the week of the 3rd to the whatever's? And mixing those corporate gigs. And I'm doing rock and roll stuff too.
Awesome.
Yeah, this company, the minute I got out of the Air Force, like 15 minutes later, I wound up going to Ohio working for a company. And that was great. Loved working for them. But it wound up getting a different opportunity in Vegas. I moved from Ohio to Vegas after that. But I maintained that relationship with those guys. So I'm doing my thing. And lo and behold, the guys from Ohio call me up. What are you doing on the such and such days next month? So I can go burn some vacation time from Cirque, and I can go work. That's right. I'm kind of dropping Cirque in.
Yeah. Cirque. That's a big drop.
So let me kind of put a pin in it.
Now, by the way, now this is where after it was almost 10 years, not quite 10 years,
something like that.
That we had texted back and forth, stayed in contact. Email, the old Facha book. Staying together.
I think you had an AOL.
I've still got, only because my mother hasn't memorized, I still have my Hotmail account because I can't throw another email address at her. Exactly. Yeah. So we were out there for Infocomm, one of the big AV trade shows.
It's in Vegas, right?
In Vegas. And I happened to be out there a couple days early because I'd never actually gone to Vegas to hang out, just to be a tourist out there. Mm-hmm. It's always for the trade show. And so I know Joe's out there. I'm like, man, let's get together for some, dinner, drinks, something. And he cordially invites me over to see my first ever Cirque Soleil show, Ka, which was off the chain, amazing production. And
I've seen that. It's a great show. Yeah.
And he's like, hey, just meet me in the lobby and, we'll get you through. And I'm standing in the lobby texting him. He's like, I'm standing in the lobby and I'm looking around. And he's standing 3 feet from me.
Yeah, it says you didn't know the ponytail and the goatee.
So
thing.
His hair right
now.
now.
Uniform.
Yeah, just to let you know.
You had an Air Force cut, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, I had a flat top.
Yeah, of course.
He had the flat top.
Of course.
Yeah, so I stared at him and went, Joe?
That was funny. I got that a lot.
Oh, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, it is what it is.
So
post Air Force.
So post Air Force. So you're doing freelance gigs, Ohio, but really in between there was Cirque.
Yeah, what happened was an Air Force buddy of mine who landed in Vegas took an opportunity to work for a Cirque show. And while I'm dumping a truck or loading a truck in Ohio, he says, hey, man, would you be interested in this gig that's just opened up out here in Vegas? I said, I don't know, tell me about the gig, and blah, 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 blah. Resume goes in, a couple of references, and poof, I'm out there. But part of the reason I got the gig is, well, I knew what to do. I knew what they needed. I didn't recognize it at the time, but 15 minutes after I got there, they need a guy who knows a lot of this Meyer stuff. So in that was one leg up I had. I had the Air Force history behind me.
Right.
So I could show up on time, not be a jerk, get the job done, and learn everything else that I didn't really know very well. And there was a lot of that. I mean, I knew comm. I can run comm to both follow spots. No, that's not what we do here. When there's like BTRs, the 50 I stations of ClearComm. Now it's an Eclipse system. I mean, just the depth and the breadth of it was way beyond anything I expected. But I demonstrated that, okay, he's teachable.
Yeah.
He's not a jerk. He knows the Meyer stuff, which is good. He can do this. He can do that. He can fill in the other circumstances, and we could teach him the rest.
So you're working. So now you're freelancing here. You're at the Chapin Theater freelancing. So the timing of all that, with the pandemic. So how have you been doing? All right, considering?
The first part of it was, I should say, how did I come to Florida is probably
yes. Well, maybe that. So did the pandemic? Yeah. What came first?
Yeah, we're not doing a really good job of being very linear here.
It's okay.
That's what editing's for.
We'll just edit it. I'm just kidding. We won't.
Yeah,
we'll just rearrange all of the.
Yeah.
Cut that bit out. Bzz, 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 bzz. What's that noise?
This is all staying in, by the way.
So 2011, 12, whatever the hell it is, I separate and I do a year or so in Ohio. I go out to Vegas. I do my time there. And then I hear Drawn to Life is going to be stood up, the new Cirque show out in Orlando that's replacing Lanuba. I'm like, this has been great, but I've got a ton of family in Florida. I've got grandchildren in Georgia, not far from Robins Air Force Base. Go figure. So my parents are in their 80s, and I still have both of them, and I thank God every day for that, and they're still with it. So just kind of looking at the arc of life of things, man, it would be cool if I was 5 hours away from my grandkids and 2 hours away from my parents' winter house, their snowbirds. And I thought it'd be a good move for me personally, in my personal life, to come closer to family and all of that. So I throw my ring in the hat for that. It doesn't work out in the end. And they suggest to me, these fellas down the road at Universal at the Blue Man show are going to be looking for a guy, because lo and behold, they hired the guy from there, which is great. I know Dave. Dave's a great guy, fantastic engineer, super talented, really smart. But he left a hole in the Blue Man seat. And they said, well, if you'd like, we could forward your resume to them. I'm like, duh. Yeah. Blue Man. And I'd seen a Blue Man show, but I didn't know anything about the company.
Yeah.
So I came out in October of 2019, and I started working with Blue Man Group, Universal Orlando, as the head of audio, which was fantastic.
That's a great gig.
I love that organization. I love that company. I love they're so dedicated to their craft.
Yeah.
And they're collaborative. The idea is that we want your input. We know what we think we want to do, but whatever it is we think we want to do, and I'm going to speak for them. That's a little risky, but it's something like includes your input.
Yeah.
Right. You're not here to just punch holes in paper.
Yeah.
You're part of a process. We're part of a company, and we're all going to express ourselves through this thing. And sometimes, people stumble finding their place.
Yeah.
But I'd gotten through the honeymoon period, and I had worked and gotten through all of that. And the musical director and me, we were working on some of the soundscape in the space, and maybe we could push these instruments over here and add some reverb over there. And I delayed the PA around. It's like, whoa, that doesn't have the impact, but can I get the impact like this? Just all of that creative stuff.
Fun. Yeah.
Oh, super fun, bro. And then COVID.
Yeah.
And we were pretty wrecked, because it was going to be 2 weeks to slow the spread. And then, maybe 6 to 8 weeks to turn everything back on.
Yeah.
And we'll probably know more in about 6 weeks. And 6 weeks turned into 6 more weeks. And all of a sudden it's August.
Yeah.
And in the end, they decide not to reopen the Blue Man show at Universal. I learned this in, I think it was January of 2021.
That's nuts.
That was ruthless. So we were...
That's a shame. That
I
was a
made
great
the
show.
mistake of dragging my feet, because I don't want to say I believe them as if they were telling us an untruth. They didn't know either.
Yeah. Right. They didn't.
There was no way for them to know, I guess. They were giving us the best info they had. Looks like 6 to 8 weeks at the most, guys. We'll let you know in a week or two what we've learned.
Yeah.
And it was a whole year. So that's it. That's water under the bridge.
Cool. Well, I'm sure I'll get a chance to see that again when I'm in one of those other cities, not Orlando. So, well, hey guys, I really appreciate you getting together with us today. Joe, thanks for coming. Thank you for your service.
It's my pleasure.
And
Thank you.
Our special Veterans Day edition of the Sound Connection podcast rolls on. Our next guest, Ray Biba, is a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps and currently works at QSE as a director of system sales for the West and Florida territories. Ray told us about being a drummer in the Marines and about starting his own rep firm and his love for Star Wars and Disney. We had a lot of fun recording this. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Ray.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great.
So yeah, we're recording here at Infocomm at a hotel lobby. So, if you hear a little background noise or a little background music, don't fret, listeners. So
This is pretty high budget. I appreciate it.
yeah, very high budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so my first question to you is, before we get to the the veteran part of your career, is how'd you even just end up in the sound bit? Like, what drew you to the sound business in general, or is it? I think you're a musician, right? Is that
I am.
was it the music first and then the sound, or the sound and then the music, or
I think it was just music first. You know, growing up in the cornfields of Illinois, you know, I could do some like labor, work on farms. I worked in at a cement company, you know, so physical labor stuff. And then I was a musician. I started when I was in second grade. So there's only a couple things I really knew in my life, you know, growing up in the cornfields of Illinois, and that's, you know, physical labor or play music. And you do physical labor so long that you know that that's not what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I had aspirations like everybody else. I was going to be a rock star. No one goes through school and says, I'm going to be an AV.
No, not
Never.
many people. Not many
I mean,
people.
is that how you did it?
No, I definitely didn't do that. I did talk to a guy recently who's in our business and plays guitar, and apparently never wanted to be a rock star. But that's a whole nother podcast.
I want to be a rock star, not for the music, you know, for everything else that came with it.
Yeah, just the fun, travel.
Oh, yeah, the travel, the fun.
Yeah.
Which is probably why I ended up going into the service, because they said I could see the world.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so you're a musician, you say. What do you play?
I'm a drummer, or as my wife calls it, a dumber.
Yeah. So you started in the second grade. How'd your parents feel about that? All that noise.
I mean, they were pretty supportive. I mean, way more supportive than I would have been, you know. So my dad worked a pretty physical job. He would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and there were times where, you know, my drum set was right under their bedroom, and we would be playing till 1 or 2 in the morning on a work night, and
my
he
gosh.
never complained.
Oh my
So
gosh.
as far as having parents that were super supportive of a hobby,
Yeah, it doesn't get much supportive than that. More supportive
no,
than
it
that.
was
Yeah.
it was crazy to think about now that I'm a father. Back then,
Yeah.
you know, it's just it's incomprehensible to me. So, you know, very early on, when I started taking drum lessons, my parents gave me a goal that said, hey, you're going to be going to this drum competition, which was, you know, so I grew up in central Illinois. We were going to go up to north of Chicago into Arlington Heights for a drum competition. And they said, look, if you can get first place, we will buy you any drum set you want.
There's some motivation.
That was serious motivation. So I did what most kids didn't do, and that was I was determined to get first place. So I had been playing drums for less than a year. I went up there and I ended up getting first place in the what they called the drum set solo competition. And my parents, true to their word, took me to a music store. They let me pick any drum set I wanted, which, you know, my first kit was my dad had a Ludwig that I played, but there was a black leather Slingerland drum set. And I was a big Happy Days Fonz fan, and I'm like,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
nothing cooler than black leather, right?
Right.
So that's the drum kit they bought me.
Nice.
And I played that all the way through, you know, grade school, high school.
Awesome. So you get through high school, you're a drummer through high school, bands, I assume.
Yeah, I did band.
Yeah.
I was pretty active all the way through high school.
And then, so when did the service? Was it right out of high school?
So right out of high school, I ended up going into the Navy.
The Navy?
I did. And I went into, I was going to be a nuclear engineer. So I went through submarine school, and then came down here to Orlando to go to the nuclear program. And back in the 80s, they kind of promised everybody everything.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out. So it ended up breaching my contract. I got out, and I tooled around for a little bit, and then I ended up going into the Marine Corps. So I was actually in the Navy first, and then I would say about a year and a half later, I ended up going into the Marines.
Hey, little side note. That training camp you went to, I live on it. So years ago, the city of Orlando sold that land, or, you know, they shut down the Naval Training Center and sold that land to a big developer, and, you know, with all these strings attached and yada, yada. And they leveled most of it, like most of it, left most of the big oak trees and parks and in the lake, which is probably full of all kinds of weird stuff from the Navy. And that's where I live. Yeah, my neighborhood's right there.
And what's interesting is I went back to MCRD in San Diego, and they've opened up most of that. They've sold it to developers who have taken the existing structures. So where I went to boot camp, the barracks I was in is actually, my son and I went during Comic-Con one year and went there and bought comic books at a comic store that happened to be.
So they kept the structure.
They kept the whole look and stuff. It was
That's
weird
cool.
to see grass on the parade deck and stuff from
Right.
where we used to march around, but it was
Nice.
very interesting.
So how long were you in the Marine Corps?
I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. Now, as I didn't go in to be in the band, I went in, I figured I already knew how to play drums. I wanted to go learn a skill. So I was one of these spur of the moment guys. So I signed up for the Marines. I don't know, it was probably like the 1st or 2nd of March, and I was deployed on the 13th. I went in an open contract.
Oh boy.
And this was during Desert Storm Part 1, right? So you're talking like 90.
Yeah.
And I went through recruit training, went through Marine combat training, and they were trying to figure out what my MOS was going to be. And in boot camp, I went and they saw that I was in the band, so I auditioned. And you were forced to go. If they saw that you were in the band by your transcripts, you had to go audition.
Yeah.
So I went and I auditioned, and it was like a full day audition of just going through all these different scenarios and getting in front of different people. And I ended up getting orders to go to the School of Music in Little Creek, Virginia. So I didn't want to be in the band, and I ended up being in the band.
Being in the band.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So do you regret that, or was it a good experience?
No, it was a great experience. You definitely learn a lot, right? So you're still a Marine first, and then you're also a musician. So you kind of get, I don't want to call it the best of both worlds. You get both worlds, right? So
Right.
all your uniforms and stuff have to be performance ready.
Right.
So during a work day, you might get to go to work in civilian clothes, which isn't normal in the Marine Corps.
Right.
It's because you have to have everything ready at a moment's notice to go do a change of command, or some general might want the band to show up for some sort of ceremony. And so everything always had to be ready. Now, not everybody was that disciplined, and I certainly wasn't early on, but those are the things that you learn while you're in, which is helpful.
So I imagine if
as an
you're
adult.
not, you have to get it together. Otherwise, bad things happen.
It definitely made for some bad days.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So did you travel anywhere cool while in the Marines?
Yeah, I mean, I actually got to go to Okinawa, Japan for a year, which was a great duty station. I did do a change of command in Guantanamo Bay.
That's cool.
It's cool, except you learn that you didn't want to be stationed there for a year because it's a pretty small footprint to be on, and you're looking out the fence at some beautiful
But
beaches.
how many people can say they've been there? Other than the people that are there for the other the wrong reasons.
Yeah, no, it was definitely made you grateful to be back
Yeah.
and have some of the amenities that we have. I like going to a chow hall that didn't have fly tape full of flies, where
Yeah.
the tape's actually moving
Oh my gosh.
in the
Yeah.
air over you while you're trying to eat. So it definitely made you humble.
So my dad was in the U.S. Air Force, and he got to go to Japan, Okinawa specifically. And I would imagine there's an Air Force base there too.
Kadena.
And he has a lot of stories, most of which he doesn't tell me. But he really enjoyed it over there.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting. There's some cultural things that a little country boy from the middle of Illinois made you pretty bright-eyed, that you couldn't believe that this kind of stuff actually happens in the world.
Yeah.
And I understand why it doesn't talk about some of it.
Yeah. So, so what do you think your experience, in the Navy and the Marines, what's the biggest thing you think you got out of it that kind of made you who you are today, or biggest thing you learned? I know it's.
Well, I mean, people that know me today think I'm probably, they would dispute what I'm going to say, but you definitely learn discipline, which is, anybody that comes around me, I kind of push the edge of everything, so they probably don't understand that coming out of my mouth. You get a sense of urgency. It's it definitely, I think, helps you understand what might be important in the situation. You learn teamwork, and you learn how to work with people that you might not ordinarily work with. You know what? There's a lot of different cultures and backgrounds and stuff that you have to come together and become a pretty high-functioning unit, which is not how I grew up, right? Everybody I grew up around, we looked the same.
Right.
So it was interesting to get that worldly perspective and to see that, you know, all different types of people can come together and work together to a common goal.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that's a great lesson.
So that's the biggest thing I took away.
So would you encourage young people to take that path to, you know, 'cause I mean, when, you know, young people coming out of high school, you can go to college, you can not go to college, you can join the service, which does have a lot of benefits. But, so, you know, would you encourage young people to take that path?
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody. I mean, I would encourage a program that might allow for somebody between their junior and senior year to experience some sort of boot camp to help them understand what the world might be like. It certainly helped me in my path. I don't even know what I would be if I didn't go down that road. So for me, it was definitely worth it 1,000%. I've seen others, though, that tried to go down that path that it just didn't fit their personality. You know, so I don't think it's for everybody. But I think if you have the chance to dabble in it, I think it better prepares you.
Yeah.
So I'm one of those guys that believe in some sort of civil service between the junior and senior year, which sounds kind of communist, but
Socialist.
yeah.
So I think up until just a few years ago, my wife's from Germany, and up until a few years ago, you had to do some sort of civil service, you know, and they just, I think, got rid of it, you know, somewhat recently. And but it, you know, I think especially when you're young, I think it's just part of learning some life skills, right? That, yeah. You know, would you encourage them? Would you not encourage them?
I think it depends on the personality
Just
type.
depends on their,
Yeah, I mean, it can be pretty harsh. Obviously, there's different levels too, right? You can go Coast Guard or Air Force, and you can go to the extremes, you know, which I would say would be more of the Army, Marine Corps route.
Yeah.
It's definitely not for everybody, and there's a reason that not everybody makes it through.
Yep. But I think regardless of the branch, I think, you know, some branches are tougher than others, but, you know, there's definitely a theme of discipline and just rigidity, and you got to adjust.
Well, I mean, I don't expect any of my friends from the Marine Corps to hear what I'm about to say, but having gone through Navy when I was 18 years old and celebrating my 21st birthday in the Marine Corps boot camp, I would say that since the Navy was first, it was more difficult. Right? So I'm not saying that the Navy boot camp is more difficult or the Marine Corps is easier, but given that I had the opportunity to do the Navy boot camp first, probably set me up to better enjoy, if I could even say that, Marine Corps boot camp.
You were better prepared.
But psychologically, I was prepared.
Yeah.
I mean, physically, it was brutal.
Yeah.
Especially for, you know, I probably went in weighing 140 pounds.
Yeah.
Right. I've eaten myself 2.5 times at least. Not that much, but it feels good saying that.
Yeah.
I've definitely eaten myself since then.
Yeah.
So it was physically grueling. Mentally, I think it was easier.
Yeah. That's interesting. But yeah, I think certainly it prepared you for it, and you were in the mindset and knew what to expect, or at least somewhat.
Right.
So after your service, what did you do? So your what do they call it? Separation? When you leave the Marines?
Yeah, so I separated, and, you know, obviously I went into the Marines hoping to learn a skill set. You know, so I do think I learned, you know, some leadership and teamwork, all that stuff that I
But you didn't have that. You weren't like an engineer or anything, right?
No. So I was a drummer in the Marines. I mean, I did learn some skills while I was in, to do supply, and, you would have to make sure that we had the instruments and drumsticks and all that stuff. So I took a liking, or someone at least brought me into that side of, managing the band activities and the supply chain, if you will. So when I got out, it was one of those opportunities where I ended up getting out into the DC area. So I sent out resumes to all the music stores around. And I had an interview with Venom and Music. They owned Music Emporium at the time, which was a pretty large mail order catalog. Went in for an interview and they hired me. I got that job within a couple weeks. And started off as order entry and mail order, and pretty quickly moved up into the operations and helping out the owners, Ted Veneman and Coop Veneman. And my career basically started off from there. So I started off in retail and operations. Then a rep who will go unnamed took a liking to me and thought I would be good at being a manufacturer's rep, which I did. That didn't work out, which I started my own rep firm, and
Yeah. So how do you do that? So I mean, so for me, I took over a rep firm that was already existing, but I can't imagine starting one from scratch. That's seems like a pretty grueling task. Did you have something lined up, or?
No, I mean, nothing was lined up except for opportunity, right? So,
okay.
I happened to be in a situation where a large manufacturer left the rep firm that I was working for. So we started a rep firm. It actually wasn't the first line we got. The line we left to try to go get wasn't the first line we got. We ended up getting lines like Samson back then. We ended up getting...
So it wasn't just you, by the way.
No, there was we were all kind of like-minded. There was 3 of us that started a rep firm. It ended up being 2 of us. And then we ran a pretty successful rep firm for, 7, 8 years. And then we decided I decided that another opportunity came along to go work for QSC. So we ended up selling the rep firm.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty, as far as rep firms go, 7 years. So you really felt strongly about this opportunity with QSC.
I did. I mean, the technology and the roadmap and the technological path they were going down is something that I believed in. It's something that I was out trying to sell. The QSys platform, just the whole ideal of it was amazing at the time, where you could just take some hardware
and it still is
have
if QSC is listening.
I'm sorry?
And it still is if QSC is listening.
Well, no, I mean, the software layer and the stuff you could do, it convinced me that I wanted to be a part of this. I was not a part of the PV Media Matrix or the Beachhead product that Biamp was. So this was my opportunity in this industry to be a part of something like that. And I could have done it from your seat, which would have been amazing, but I really wanted to be inside the think tank, right?
Yeah.
And I think you have to be at the manufacturer to be at that level and it was also an opportunity. So you're talking to a guy that didn't go to college. So when you think of the leadership at QSC and you basically get a free on-the-job training MBA.
Yeah.
I couldn't pass that up.
Yeah. Makes sense.
To me, it did, and still does today.
So when you're not at QSC, what are you doing for fun? Are you still playing the drums? Are you in a band?
I still play drums. We gig at least, a couple times a month, where I live in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, so you always have fresh audiences coming in. I still have a lot of fun. I mean, for those that come out to see us play, you could tell that we are having a blast.
What kind of music are you playing?
We do everything from 60s through 2000. I mean, we probably have a catalog of 700 songs that we'll pull out. And we get crazy. We'll do a 4-hour gig and then run off to another 3-hour gig and not repeat a song and not take a break, which is hard on a drummer's body, but I'm glad I could still do it.
Yeah. Do it while you can.
Absolutely.
So what's this? I hear you're a Disney and a Star Wars fan, so I was just curious when I heard this. and maybe this is one of those inaccuracies, but which one came first, Star Wars or Disney, or was it?
Well, I would say, yeah. So I'm not a Star Wars mega fan. I was definitely impressed by it because I went to the theater when it first came out. I was a young kid.
Me too.
So that did not have the most profound impact on me, other than the technology. I mean, if you want to go down the rabbit hole of movies that touched me and probably made me who I am today, it'd be like the Planet of the Apes series. Right, just the.
Oh my gosh! I
And
remember
as
that.
you get
thought
older,
about that in years.
yeah. But as you get older and you watch them and you keep watching them, you realize that it's talking about class struggle and
Yeah.
racism, and so it's just so poignant that's probably what's shaped me today to try to be conscious of those things.
Yeah. Interesting. So,
And then obviously Disney, I became a fan later in life. I have a kid.
yeah.
So my wife and I went, and I'm just amazed at how superior their customer service is. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm
second to none, really. I mean,
Yeah,
they
no,
kind
and-
of set the bar.
and I'm just always amazed at how they could take my money as I'm smiling.
A lot of it,
A ton of it.
and every year it becomes more.
Yeah, I mean so we joined the Disney Vacation Club and all that kind of stuff.
All right.
As an idea, hopefully, something our kid loves to do. We take all of his friends all the time, and it's.
So how old is he
safe.
now? He's
senior.
a
in high
senior.
school.
So does he still enjoy coming down here?
He does.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's less about Disney and more about just experiencing all the stuff with friends. Like I
Yeah.
say, we always bring a lot of friends down with them,
Yeah.
and and you do get to suspend whatever's happening in your life to go
Yeah.
hang out for a while. And
You have just the one kid, right?
I do.
Yeah. So I
I
have
can
just
only
the one.
afford one to put through college.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way too. And I don't know how people that have with multiple kids do it. I find
It's called loans.
well, I'm not even talking about the money, just life. It's hard work. But we're always, being he's an only child, we're trying to bring friends everywhere,
Yeah.
vacations, little stays here at this hotel. On the weekends, we do these little staycations, try to bring somebody because he's a boy, he's 9, he's tons of energy and needs to be engaged all the time.
And it gets to be a lot of fun when they can start running on their own, and then you could go do
Yeah.
adult stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of it too, because when he's got a buddy, they can play. We can sit back, watch them play, and,
Right.
and have a conversation. So I can totally relate to all that. So, yeah. And once this pandemic is over, I look forward to a little more travel with some friends. So I'm going to come back to Star Wars real quick, just because I'm only out of curiosity. I had a note here about Mandalorian, just being that Star Wars Mandalorian fan. Not a fan?
No, absolutely.
Yeah? You watch
Yeah,
it?
it was very well done. I think Favreau did a good job with it. It was good too, just to see how they tie it all in. I think they do a brilliant job tying
Yeah,
in
I
the
dig it.
franchise.
I don't get to watch much TV, so I haven't watched but maybe 7 or 8 episodes, but I like it a lot. My kid likes it too, and he hasn't seen all the Star Wars yet, right? So
Well, as your son gets older, you're going to look for those kinds of things to where they're actually going to sit down and spend time with you.
Yeah,
Right. So that's one of the things.
exactly,
Mandalorian
Yeah.
is one of the things where even senior year, right, where he's off running and doing stuff and girls and all that stuff,
Yeah.
that we still make time
nice.
to do that stuff. So I'm looking forward to the next season just so we could have some more time with Michael.
Yeah, so when I was growing up, I was never into sports, but my dad was, and from time to time I'd watch with him, and just root for whoever he was rooting for. But my son, for some reason, all of a sudden has taken this huge liking to football, and we just watched. It was Jacksonville Jags playing in London, Miami Dolphins in London. And it came on, I forget, Saturday, Sunday morning. He's like, let's watch it. And, we watched that whole game together, and he was cheering. And, of course, when Miami was winning, he was rooting for Miami. And then when the Jags were coming back, he was rooting for the Jags. But it was a good time. It was good quality time, and we had a lot of fun. So I want to thank Ray for joining us today. Thank you. And thank you for your service to our country.
You're welcome. I don't know that this thing's ever going to get used.
Well, we'll see. Well,
Because you're out of control.
Well, I do appreciate you sharing your story with us today. And thank you all for listening to this episode of Sound Connections. We hope you enjoyed it and hope you guys can join us next time. Thank you for listening to our special Veterans Day edition of the Sound Connections podcast. Thank you to Joe and Ray for their service and for taking the time to sit down with us. And thank you to all of the veterans out there that are listening. Our next episode is coming out the week of Thanksgiving. We had a great conversation with Jason Waffle, who has worked in the music industry and sports broadcast, and now happens to be a member of Shore's Pro Audio team. It was a great chat, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Make sure you subscribe to the Sound Connections podcast so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to like and review us on Apple Podcasts. Thank you.